And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Hey, welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, and today is a bit of a strange show. We're not really doing the history of the mob or anything like that today. What I wanted to do was, because there's a lot of information that's coming out about the Joey Merlino trial. Jerry Capisci is covering it. I'm covering it. A lot of other people are covering it. There is somebody else who's covering it, but all he's doing is just regurgitating information that's been out there for months and calling it breaking news. And everybody knows who that scumbag is, but we're not going to go there. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of questions and answer, and then we'll cut into like a break, and then we'll talk about the Merlino trial. The Merlino thing is going to get really interesting for a lot of reasons. The trial starts January 16th. Joey's looking at a lot of time, but what I'm going to try to do is sort of catalog, A, B, C, D, and E, and then really get into the ramifications if Joey Merlino goes away to prison, because that's going to create a power vacuum in Philadelphia, whether you realize it or not. I think the odds are pretty good that Joey's going to beat the case. However, there's always little side stuff and leaks that come out before a trial. So I would assume that before this trial begins, there's going to be some bombs dropped. But that's just the reality of the nature of these types of trials. So all that being said, we're going to get to some questions. If I did not pick your question, there's probably a reason for it. I try to answer everybody's questions. I got out a little bit late this week with the Q&A. So all of that being said, if I don't get to yours, chances are it's because it's been asked either multiple times, or it's just that maybe somebody is looking for inside information that I may or may not know, and I'm just not either A, comfortable or knowledgeable enough to answer it, or I just won't answer it because it's way too high profile. And some of the discrepancies that I seem to get from people, and this is nothing new, is a lot of people seem to think that I'm scared to talk about anybody that's in the streets now. I'm not. That's not me. My perspective on that is I wouldn't like it if somebody came right out and started saying shit about me like that. So I try to keep things in perspective. I try to keep it history oriented as much as I can. So if you're asking about current street guys that are running things, I'm not going to go there. It's not out of fear. It's just out of respect. I wouldn't want somebody doing that about me. And besides, you can get a lot of information. It's online from other resources other than myself. Let them out people like that. That's just not what I'm about. I'm not about outing people. And so what you may say automatically when I say that is, well, you're talking about Joey Merlino stuff. Well, that's all public knowledge, and it's not like I'm dispelling anything that nobody knows. So that's what the difference is. It's just about a respect thing. So all of that being said, the first question comes from Johnny LaRue. How did Santo Trafficante manage to avoid being executed while in prison in Cuba, and how did he manage to get released and back to the U.S.? Well, a lot of that has to do with the turmoil that was going on in Cuba at the time. Obviously, when Batista was in charge, the mafia was able to run the casinos, the hotels, and stuff like that. It was a vested interest for Batista. He was taking kickbacks. But then as Fidel Castro came into Cuba and sort of eradicated the mafia, he didn't want them there, and he made it very tough on them. And so the real question becomes, how would somebody who's a high-profile mobster avoid execution, and how does somebody avoid? Well, it's very simple. Money. Money always pays dividends. They gave Batista a ton of money to allow them to function in the way that they needed to. You can look at The Godfather 2 for a reference to that. There's also a really good book by T.J. English called Havana Nocturne, which really breaks down exactly what happened in Cuba with Batista and Fidel Castro and Meyer Lansky and Luciano and everybody else. So that's a great book. You should go out and get it and read it. It's one of my absolute favorite mob books I've ever read in my life because I like the historical aspects of stuff like that. And you can sort of see the parallels in The Godfather 2 with Hyman Roth. So all of that being said, what it really was Trafficante dumped a lot of money. He wasn't wanted there to begin with. They didn't want an incident, so it was much easier to accept money and say, go about your business, than to really have other problems. Because believe me, if Fidel Castro had wanted to assassinate these people, it would have been very easy for him to do. But the point of the situation was Fidel Castro wanted the mob out of Cuba, and that's exactly what ended up happening at the end of the day. Richard Smith, what do you think Jimmy Burke did with all the with the massive haul from the Lufthansa heist, considering he only relinquished a small fraction of the millions that were stolen? Very simply, I don't know what he did with the money. I wasn't there, but I think that one could easily speculate. I know he took care of his family and his kids. I'm not in any way suggesting that he took money from a theft and gave it to his children as gifts. But I think the realistic thing to look at here is anytime you have that kind of money, obviously you're going to put a lot of that back out on the streets. You're going to invest in real estate. And he took care of his parents. So, I mean, I think the general idea is that the money got spread around. But Jimmy Burke wasn't the type of guy that was going to buy a Ferrari. Jimmy Burke wasn't the type of guy that was going to buy a mansion. Jimmy Burke was stone cold gangsta. And I think at the end of the day, he used money like the majority of people who get money illegally do. However, we are talking an insanely high amount, of course. So I wouldn't be totally shocked, if he invested some of it and stuff like that. But I think the legitimate answer and the honest answer would be is he probably blew a lot of it, obviously. But I think he definitely handed money out. I think that's just the reality of it. John A. Miller, who's next in line if Joey Merlino goes to prison? I am going to cover that in the portion of this show that revolves around the Philadelphia Mafia and the trial of Joey Merlino. But considering you want an answer right now, I really do think that Philip Narducci is going to take over. That's my 2 cents, and I will explain why as we get into that part of this show. Robert Sunafrank, how did Lefty Ruggiero manage to not get clipped after the feds told him who Donnie Brasco was? Very simply, the FBI saved him. Lefty Ruggiero was going to head to a meeting over this, and he surely would have been killed, obviously, for allowing the infiltration of Joe Pistone, who was a.k.a. Donnie Brasco. But the FBI actually stopped him before he was able to get to that meeting and charged him and arrested him for a bunch of different stuff. And it ended up saving his life. First of all, the FBI knew he was likely going to be killed, like a lot of other people. But they had enough to indict him, had enough to arrest him. And as luck would have it, as Lefty Ruggiero was heading to the meeting, he was actually pulled over by the FBI, and they arrested him with multiple charges, and he ended up going to prison, and that is what technically saved his life. So, it's sort of comical in a sense, but had he not broken the laws, right, he doesn't get arrested and he gets killed. So, in some ways, breaking the law probably saved his life at that point, and I think, when the police moved when they did and the FBI moved when they did, ended up saving Lefty's life, and that's the reason why he was not killed. Jim Woods. All right, now, okay, before I get to this question, I just want to put a disclaimer out. Anytime I answer a question, all right, for the most part, I'm going to give you facts that are published, knowledgeable, whatever. When I give my opinion don't mean facts, okay? My opinion is just based on what I personally believe. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this next question might start a little shit. And that's just the reality of it, but I'm going to do what I always do, and I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. Jim Woods, how come people like John Gotti Jr. and Michael Franzese have been allowed to quit the mafia without a problem and get on with their lives? It seems like it's easier today to walk away from the life after being a made member. Okay, first of all, I want to make 2 distinctions right off the bat. John Gotti Jr. and Michael Franzese are 2 different people with 2 different situations, which are almost completely the polar opposite of each other. Okay, so let me start with John Gotti Jr. first. First of all, John Gotti Jr. left the mob. If you want his reasonings, you can go to YouTube. He talks about it. He got tired of the life. He looked at his family and his kids. I can't do this anymore. Then there's prison tapes of him talking with his father, saying, look, I'm done. I don't want to do this no more. So he leaves. Did it come with ramifications? Absolutely it came with ramifications. But in certain circles, the way that this works, especially post like 1960s, 50s, like probably right after like 79, it changes a little bit. But there is this belief, because people watch movies, there is this belief because people believe everything that the government says, that you can't leave the life, that you can't, that the only way you go out is one way in, one way out. Now, you have heard other gangsters say that that's the only way in, that's the only way out, a bullet in, a bullet out. But in the case of John Gotti Jr., you gotta take his word for it. Obviously, from I don't want to say public knowledge, but there is knowledge is that there were some ramifications as far as what some people wanted to do to him as a result. But those things we can debate all day long whether they're true or not. Now, that's the way Junior talks about how he left, and you sort of got to take his word for it. I mean, obviously he's still walking around and doing things, so I think the idea that you can't is probably bullshit. However, in the case of Michael Franzese, and this is why I want to draw two different parallels here. Michael Franzese was a rat. Okay, that's the first thing. A lot of people don't talk about this. A lot of people challenge me on this, but I'm going to tell you this. He ratted out Norby Walters, and he ratted out a fucking janitor at his father's office. All right? Norby Walters was involved in shaking people down, shaking the Jackson 5 down. He was involved in the music industry, and Michael ratted him out. He testified against him, and Norby Walters got a ton of time. That's the truth, okay? Just because he doesn't rat on Joey One Arm doesn't mean he's not a rat. A rat is a rat is a rat. A rat is somebody who goes to court and testifies against somebody to help themselves, and that's what Michael did. He not only that, but he signed a cooperation agreement with the FBI. So he can sit back and make up these fantasies that he never testified against anybody, because that's a fucking lie. That's an out-and-out outrageous lie. If you don't believe me, go on to Google, type in Michael Franzese, informant, Variety. I think it was Vanity Magazine. There's like a 16-page article on the fact that he ratted people out. It also includes the fact that he testified against people, agreed to testify against people. It also goes into the fact that he signed a cooperation agreement. Okay, you don't sign a cooperation agreement if you're not going to rat. That is a rat move. Okay, John Gotti Jr. never signed a cooperation agreement against anybody in his life, never went to court and testified against anybody in his life. So there's a huge difference between John Gotti Jr. saying, I'm done, I'm going about my life, this isn't for me anymore. There's a difference between a man that does that and a man that physically was fucking shelved. Michael Franzese was thrown out of the fucking mafia. In fact, I'll even go one step further. His own father, Sonny, had no compunction about killing his own son, if that tells you anything. And then Michael's own brother's a rat. So the idea that there's a parallel between the two is absolutely bullshit. There's a huge fucking difference between these two men. One quit on his own accord and said he was done with it. The other ratted everybody out. Not only that, but Michael Franzese also gave the names of made men to the FBI. So from that perspective, Michael Franzese was thrown out of the mob. Nobody wanted to do anything. Nobody wanted nothing to do with the guy anymore. He's lucky he made it out alive. But the honest God's truth is, if you don't want to believe me and you want to sit here and bicker with me about Michael Franzese being some fucking uber genius, that's not true either. And the reason why I say that is because there's this huge claim that he makes about the Russian gas tax scam. First of all, he didn't invent that. He likes to tell people he did, but he didn't. He effectively just tried to extort another Russian who had invented the scheme. He wanted to just try to take it over. And that didn't happen because Gaspipe Casso stepped in between and says, no, this is not what's going to happen. Michael's not going to come in and take this over. We're going to spread this out amongst everybody. So the idea that he was some super fucking genius isn't true either. That's the story and the fairy tale he likes to spin. He also has a bunch of fairy tales he likes to spin about John Gotti Sr., but we're not going to get into that. But the point I'm trying to make is stop believing everything that these informants say. They lie nonstop. They make themselves out to be fucking El Chapo when they're like fucking Jimmy on a corner. That's the bottom line truth. If you don't believe me, look up the information for yourself, because everything that I ever tell you can be backed up by court documents. Okay, so that's really what I want to say about that. And I didn't mean to get on a tangent about Michael Franzese, but I just get a little tired of people like making people out to be something they really weren't. Was he an earner? Absolutely. Nobody's disputing that. Was he violent? Not at all. And that's just the truth. But at the end of the day, Michael says that he paid the mob a bunch of money and left. I don't believe that either, because you got to look at something. Think about this for a second. This guy, honest to God, was greedy. You think he's going to give money up to the mob? No. Nobody was going to fuck with him after he talked to the FBI. And granted, it is absolutely unequivocally true that he didn't testify against a mafioso, but he testified against other people. He gave up mob names, made members to the FBI. You tell me, is that a rat move? Is that a rat move? To me, it's a rat move. Call it a dry snitch, call it what you want, but a rat is a rat is a rat. But at the end of the day, look, John Gotti Jr. walked away from the mob. He's leading a good life, doing what he's got to do. So, you know what? Take his word for it. People live in this nostalgic world of believing everything that comes from Goodfellas, everything that comes from The Sopranos, everything that comes from The Godfather. Whereas maybe Goodfellas gets the violence aspect of all of that right. That was still a very flawed movie in a million different fucking ways. So unless you're a part of that life, unless you grow up on the streets and you know how the politics work behind the scenes, you really don't understand it yourself. So you just got to take the guy's word for it. That until anybody can prove to me otherwise, I tend to believe what he has to say. All that being said, let's move on to another question. This revolves around the Dutch Schultz show that I did. Mark D'Amico, why go to the commission and get permission to whack Thomas Dewey? Why not just whack him? You yourself are always bringing up broken mob rules, whacking bosses since Masseria. If I'm Dutch Schultz, I'm whacking him. Fuck getting permission, so to speak. He's just going to get, because asking for permission to kill Dewey's going to get him killed anyway. Mark, that's a really good question, and I probably should have stated this, but Schultz actually did try to kill Dewey 4 or 5 times and botched it. So you have a really good point in saying, if he's going to get killed for asking for permission anyway, why not just do it? But he was killed for multiple reasons. Dewey was just like the proof that they needed to do it. But the realistic thing is Luciano had wanted to kill Schultz anyway. They wanted to take over his rackets. Then when he started to get a little loose around the corners, that just gave them the incentive to do it. And so in part I understand why I asked, just go ahead and do it. I mean, you're a gangster, you got to do what you got to do. But I think that Schultz realized very quickly if that was something that he succeeded in doing, he was a dead man anyway, and he was going to lose his rackets. And a lot of the problem was the fact that Schultz stood in front of the commission and accused them all of trying to steal his rackets. And that really set the precedent for, okay, we got a loose cannon, this guy's got to go. But I understand what you mean by that. Okay, Casey McCracken, the connection between the Italian mob in Canada and the Hells Angels. Isn't that a Bonanno connection? The Bonannos do not necessarily really control Canada anymore. They definitely have a relationship with the Rizzuto crime family, but that has been torn and tattered, and that goes back to when Joey Merlino was boss. They really had some problems then, and obviously the Rizzutos are taking on Calabrian factions and stuff like that. Where the Hells Angels fit into all of that is drugs. The Hells Angels really, the amount of money that they're able to produce, especially in Montreal and Toronto, it really is coming from the meth trade, from the opiate trade, the gun trade. And so there has always been, and maybe I'll do a show one day about the Italian mafia and motorcycle gangs sort of having a mutual understanding. Philadelphia especially, I know that Joey Merlino at one point had a lot of ties with the pagans. But I think in terms of this question, excuse me for 1 second. In terms of this question, I think the reality is that it's better to be in business together than to fight each other. I don't want to compare the Italian mob with biker gangs, although biker gangs are really one of my hobbies. I like reading stuff about them as well. They're a lot more cutthroat. They're not going to mess around. They're going to blow your house up, kill your kids. They really don't care. But the connection is really drugs. Obviously, the drugs filter in from Europe, come in through the border in Canada. Hells Angels got a lot of hands into that, as well as other biker gangs. So it's not just necessarily the Hells Angels, but that is the big That is the big connection there, and it involves drugs. Let's see, Paul Church. Where's the millions? Where's the millions of dollars made by the mob kept, knowing they can't have access to legitimate bank accounts? Well, actually, that's not true. Not that I'm teaching Crime School 101 here, but anybody that's a felon can't own an ABC liquor license, right? So what do? You put it in your wife's name, you put it in your girlfriend's name, you put it in a friend's name. So the reality is, I think the days of keeping $500,000 in a shoebox in a safe in your bedroom probably is not the reality. I'm sure that there is a lot of money that is laying around. I also know that lawyers will hold on to money for clients, keep it in safes and stuff like that. So not that I know any lawyers personally that do that. I'm just suggesting that there are ways around that. There's also ways of giving gifts, and there's ways of putting things in your wife's name and your children's names, like especially things like college funds and stuff like that. So believe it or not, I don't think anybody's sitting at home with like $20 million in their closet. They know how to spread it out. They also know how to dump money into legitimate enterprises as well. A lot of street guys have legitimate businesses, and that's how they can funnel money and launder money. But the idea that they don't have a bank account, if you got a no-show job, you're getting checks, right? So the reality is that there are ways around that. So hopefully that answers that question. Darren Vizard, I saw on YouTube Tommy Gambino interview where he talks about the relationship between the mafia and the Vatican and John F. Kennedy. What's your opinion on what he says? He claims Hoffa is buried in a concrete stanchion. I thought he was incinerated. Tommy Gambino's full of shit. Has always been full of shit. I don't believe a word he says. I have seen the majority of the thing that you're actually talking about. I don't buy it. Look, this is another guy that just wants to get on and talk about the world for what it is. And the reality is, at the end of the day, I could sit here and give you every conspiracy theory and back it up with bullshit, but I'm not going to do that. We've talked about JFK to that extent. Frank Sheeran is the one who killed Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa was then taken to a mortuary a couple of blocks away from the house he was killed in, and they incinerated him. You're not going to find him in a stanchion. These are old mob tales that are handed down from one guy to another. But the reality is this guy just wants to make a name for himself, just like everybody else that knows people and wants to make stuff up. Look at me, look at me, look at me. This is what they do. So as far as what his claims are, I think his claims are ridiculous. The relationship between the mafia and the Vatican, I don't buy either. I never have. At least from the United States perspective, it may be a little different in Italy, but I don't really want to go there. I am Roman Catholic, so I would like to believe the mafia has not infiltrated my religion, but, regardless of that fact, that's as far as I wanted to go there. And what I want to do right now is I want to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to finish up the questions and get on to the Merlino trial. Hey, welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are answering your questions here, and then we'll get on to the Joey Merlino trial. The next question comes from Richard Smith. When did the Bananos lose the seat on the commission? Who was boss at the time? Was the decision challenged? Why was the decision made, especially when all the families profited from drugs? This is sort of a multiple answer. First of all, the commission seat wasn't taken away because of drugs. It was a penalty as a result of many, many, many things. And when I mean many things, it was many things. But what you really have to do is go back to the late 60s when this happened. And Joe Bonanno refused to meet with the commission. He out and out refused. He faked his kidnapping as a result, because at the end of the day, Joe Bonanno was acting a little suspect, to say the least. And he had actually had plans to try to literally assassinate the entire commission. He wanted to take over everything. And the bosses, specifically Carlo Gambino, found out, and they effectively removed him as boss. Bonanno did try to fight that, but it didn't last. And he effectively was told that he could retire, he was done, he was shelved, but if he started any more issues, he would be killed on the spot. And it really goes back to just how effective of a leader he was. I know he wrote a book and he likes to describe himself as a man of honor and all of that, but at the end of the day, he really wasn't. It didn't have really anything to do with drugs. The truth is, all the crime families had, obviously money invested in drugs, and it was a big moneymaker. So anybody that says it's not true, well, it is. Everybody made money from narcotics back in those days, especially the Bonanno crime family. But Joe Bonanno had a real ego problem, and the commission didn't like it. And when they summoned him to a meeting and said, you need to come explain yourself, and he out and out refused and staged the kidnapping and all of this stuff that he did, it was just a penalty that he was going to pay for the way he was acting. They didn't trust the Bonanno crime family at that point, and that's one of the reasons why the commission seat was taken away from the Bonannos as a penalty. I know that Joey Merlino, when he tried to take over, really parlayed with John Gotti to try to get his seat back, and John Gotti went to bat for him, and he tried to get his seat back on the commission, but at that point, it just wasn't going to happen. It was a penalty. It was left that way for a reason, and still to this day, the Bonannos don't have a seat on the commission. But it had more to do with Joe Bonanno's behavior, especially when you move towards like the 70s when his son Bill Bonanno, they tried to shake down a guy who owned a lot of car lots, and they got in big trouble for that in San Jose, California. And I'm telling you what, and this is just my opinion, had Carlo Gambino probably still been alive in the late 70s when this happened, Joe Bonanno probably would have been killed. He was warned to stay out of the mob life. He was shelved. He was done. It was over. And he was told to stay out of the rackets and just move on with his life. And he obviously didn't. And I think if Gambino had still been alive, then I think Gambino would have killed him. And probably rightfully so, if we're going to talk in terms of like the street life and what he was told to do. So it really didn't have much to do with drugs. It had to do with just Bonanno in general, just basically telling the commission, fuck off, I'm going to do what I want. The commission named a new boss of the Bonannos. He refused to accept that. He started a minor war. So there's like all of these intangibles. And I did cover that. If you go back to, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, the Joey Merlino, the Merlino show that I did, I sort of go in details of that, or you can go to the Joe Bonanno show that I did, and I talk more about that. But the Merlino show sort of connects some dots as to what happened later on when Merlino takes over the crime family and some of the problems they have. But go to the Joe Bonanno show, and I really talk in depth about that specific thing. John Pappas, was Luciano poisoned? I don't think so. Died of a heart attack. I know there's been a lot of rumors out there about Luciano in general. The fact is Luciano was shelved as well. And that was basically done as a precursor to your day is over, your limelight is over. Stay in Italy, just do your thing. Eventually he did die and is brought back here for burial and etc. But Luciano was another one that was shelved for a reason. And, the mob had started to grow and change in the days of Luciano, which, he's the godfather of organized crime as far as I'm concerned, and with the way it was set up in general. But, guys have a shelf life, and that's the thing about that lifestyle is that, you can have a good 7 to 10 year run, but ultimately everything is ever changing, and everything grows and changes as time moves forward, different surveillance techniques and everything. So the idea that post late 60s, even the late 50s, Luciano was done. He was effectively shelved as well, but I don't think he was killed. There would have been no reason, and they wouldn't have sent Frank Sinatra over there with a gift of a couple $100,000 either, if that were the case. And what that was that's a piecemeal of, here's some money, shut the fuck up, stay out of this, you're done. And that's realistically the way it was. Now, they did treat Luciano sort of as a consigliere. In the end, they would listen to his advice, but for him to have any power or control at that point was sort of null and void. Eric Madero, I have heard the Colombos are the most violent of the 5 families. Who's the least violent? How would you rank the families in terms of violence? Well, it depends what time period you're going to talk about. Today you don't see as many mafia murders, obviously. I talked about this actual sort of topic with somebody else the other day, and the days of front page news of a guy getting killed at 34th Street or outside Sparks Steakhouse or whatever. Those days are pretty much gone. But if I was going to rank them time period wise, that would be kind of difficult. But for the sake of this, Colombos, Genoveses, Gambinos, Bonanos, and Lucchese's are the last. But that's pretty much where I have them slated. So those are all the questions. I got a couple of more, but I'm not going to get to them because I'm running late on time. But what I'm going to do is take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to sort of talk about the Joey Merlino trial. And what I'm going to do is, originally when I said I was going to do this, I wanted to kind of categorize it from beginning to end, but I don't think I'm going to do it that way. I think what's important is we get the information out there. Obviously, we know that there were 46, 48 people indicted. Medicaid fraud, medical fraud, insurance fraud, you name it, fraud-wise, it's there. But what we really need to get into is how Joey got caught up in this, what is going on currently right now, what gives Joey the best odds to beat the case, what the government is going to try to do, and just sort of play it out, and then talk about the eventuality of this. If Joey Merlino goes to prison, what is the realistic events that will happen? And I believe there will be a power vacuum to some extent. And I think it's going to be interesting to sort of get into that. But once again, the trial starts January 16th, and Joey is going on trial with Eugene Rooster D'Onofrio. And that it's going to be interesting because I know that Eugene Rooster D'Onofrio wanted to separate himself from Merlino, and that is actually, believe it or not, pretty normal thing. That's not abnormal for a guy to say he doesn't want to be, go on trial with somebody else. It's just, that's natural. They don't want to be connected because government's already going to make connections anyway. We'll talk about John Rubio, the rat, and Pug Lovaglio, who is a rat as well, and whether or not these two informants specifically can damage Merlino. I think they can, but I think they can at the same time. And like I said, we'll get into that, and we'll talk about best case scenario, worst case scenario, and what it's going to do to Philadelphia in general, because it's really going to create a problem in many ways. And one of the big questions I keep getting is if Joey Merlino goes to prison, is he going to be able to keep control of the family? And I don't think he's going to be able to do that. I think there's going to be a change. But we'll get into that when we come back. And, that's that. So stay tuned. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking the Joey Merlino trial. Now, if you're listening to this and you want an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and furthermore, you're not going to exactly get that. I just kind of wanted to talk briefly because really, if I was going to cover the Merlino trial, that could be a whole 2-hour show because there's so much going on. However, what I really want to do is just kind of get to the basis of it because at the end of the day, I don't want to discombobulate everybody with like a million different facts. The fact is this. Okay, Joey Merlino is going on trial. No, not murder is not included in any of these. And Joey getting indicted with 48, I think it was 48 other people, and I believe like 42 of the 48 have taken plea deals. And Joey didn't take a plea deal for a lot of different reasons. First of all, Joey's never took a plea in his life, and I don't think he's going to start now. Joey's old school in that respect. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think the fact that maybe it was, John Rubio is the guy that, was testifying against him, that's why, Joey said, come on, I can get away with it. This guy's, pile of shit, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think what it has to do with the fact that Joey's never taken a plea, and he's not about to. And Joey knows he's going to do a hefty amount of time if he gets convicted for these crimes. It would effectively probably render Joey a 20-year sentence, maybe a little less. But he was offered a plea deal by the government, and that's kind of where I want to start. Why guys accept plea deals? That seems to be the new thing. In the old days, you didn't take a plea, you fought your charges, and that's the way it would just go. I think guys like Patsy Perello, who were in their 70s and took a huge pinch and got a lot of time. When you're mid-70s, taking a 5 to 7, it could be a death sentence, realistically, in terms of your age. We see sort of the same things going on with Vinny Asaro, being 82 years old, taking a pinch for 8 years. That could essentially be a death penalty. So do I think that guys like Patsy Perello probably regret taking a plea? Maybe so, maybe not. Listen, once you reach a certain age, it's like, do I accept the deal, do 75% of my time and get out, maybe I still got some time left to live, or do I fight it and get a shitload of time and die in prison? And that becomes the reality. In terms of Joey, the indictment itself, a lot of fraud. They call it the East Coast Enterprise Act. And largely, Joey Merlino has been indicted on the words of John Rubio, who is a snitch, a rat. However, he's a little bit interesting of a snitch and a rat in the sense that the guy is incredible. And not that any rats are, but there are certain people that are a little bit more credible than this guy. Largely indicted mainly because of over 800 hours of not only video surveillance, telephonic surveillance, and audio taped surveillance. Usually that would be enough to probably get somebody in a lot of trouble. However, this is where it gets interesting. In case you haven't been following along, John Rubio, one, for starters, can't keep his story straight. Two, he committed crimes while he was under the guise and the protection of the FBI. That's another problem. The third problem is the chain of evidence and how that's handled. And I'm going to use this as a reference so people can understand. If you watch the movie Donnie Brasco, you obviously Johnny Depp playing Joe Pistone. And every time that Joe Pistone makes an audio tape or tapes a phone call with somebody, he meets the FBI in a diner and hands over the tape, doesn't manipulate it, just says, here, this is the conversations that I had. And those usually happen within 24 to 48 hours of being recorded, just so everything is on the up and up and there isn't some sort of defense of, well, wait a minute, why did it take you 3 months to hand this tape in? That's kind of suspicious. So things have to be handled from an FBI's perspective, the way the evidence is handled, right? Such things is when the tapes are handed in, here's part one, here's part two. But the problem with John Rubio is that there are large portions of these tapes that he made in discussion with Joey Merlino that are missing or have been manipulated or certain parts are deleted. And that causes a huge problem for the government. And the government knows this. And this is why the government offered Joey a plea. The government does not offer you a fucking plea deal in any sense of the imagination if they know that they have a 100% conviction rate. Okay? Nobody sits down with you and says, listen, I know you did it. our evidence is kind of shaky at best, so here's what we're going to do. You won't do 25 years. You won't do 20 years. Just take this deal. You'll do 4. You'll be out 3.5, 2.5, and then that'll be the end of it. Pay a fine. We're good to go. And a lot of guys take those deals. I can speak of myself. Not that I should, but I'm going to. And I don't want to get into like all the details, but at one point, I was sitting in front of a district attorney, and the district attorney offered me a plea deal. I didn't want to take it, but 2 people were going to testify against me, and my lawyer argued that, look, this is like going to be a deathbed confession. These guys are going to turn on you. They're going to say you did this and this and this. It's going to be tough for you to fight it. And what I ended up doing was taking what's called an Alford Plea, and that's basically admitting guilt on the evidence that was handed into the court. So it says, based on the evidence that you turned in, you would likely get a conviction. That way I could maintain my innocence as far as that goes. I'm not admitting complicity into the crimes that I was convicted of. And yeah, the truth is I could have fought it and I might have been able to win, but there's 2 things I want to bring up about me, just because it sort of falls in the line of what we're talking about here. Long before I ended up going to court, my attorney had suggested to me that, because we talked about the case, and he knew exactly what I was negligible of and what I wasn't. There were some highly suspect things, but at the end of the day, I did what I was accused of doing, so it's not like I'm going to sit here all innocent and say, oh, I was framed, because that's not the truth. But my lawyer sat down with me and said, listen, here's the deal. These guys are these other 2, your co-defendants, who are about to become the biggest state's evidence you've ever seen. He says to me, look, we'll hire somebody, we'll put a wire on you, you go talk to these guys, you can still communicate with them, get them to indict themselves before they turn on you. And this is prior to them, like, ratting me out. I didn't think they would rat me out. These were some pretty old school guys. I didn't think it was going to happen. And I was against it. I wasn't going to audio tape my friends. Even today, after being convicted, whatever have you, I still don't feel that way. To me, that was a rat move. I didn't, whatever it was going to be, it was going to be. I sort of juxtaposed with myself that for everything I had ever done wrong in my entire life, if this is the pinch I had to take, this is the one I would take. And it was that simple. At some point, you have to face the music. You got to do your time like a man or whatever. And that's what I was going to do. I out and out refused to make an audio tape. I out and out refused to get somebody indicted for something else. But let me just show you how this works. So these 2 bastards, right, that testified against me had probably, I shit you not, like 20 indictments against them. Like, the shit that I was being charged with was peanuts compared to what they were being charged with. But they see the writing on the wall, you see. And so they know they're going to do 25, 30-year stretch easy off the bat for the amount of indictments and charges they were facing. And so what they did was they turned around and said, it was all his idea. He was the mastermind of this, that, and the third. And I think it's a punk move. I think it's a degenerate move. But it's one that politically they thought they had to do. And so we get to court, effectively. My lawyer looks at me and says, look, they're gonna testify against you today. The state is offering this, and this. I said, all right, I'll take that. And I did it, 1, to save myself to fucking misery. I did it, 2, to save my father, who was dying of cancer, to misery. Because I knew if I went away, I would never see him again. And I didn't want that to happen. He was sick with cancer. What are you going to do? But I got lucky. And I got lucky because I hadn't been in trouble before. And I got lucky. So what they ended up doing was I got like a 25-year sentence, and then they reduced that to like 10 years, 2 charges, 5 concurrent. And it goes on and on and on. But at the end result, I paid a fine. I ended up being on some supervised stuff for a while. And here's the amazing part of this. I do whatever I got to do. I go back to my lifestyle or whatever. But these guys that ratted me out, who had like fucking 20 charges, didn't do a day in jail. And we're talking some serious shit here. This was no like joke. This was not like, tiny little felonies or whatever. These guys were animals. They got away with everything. So when I tell you that the state and the federal government pays rats to do what they do and then doesn't give them any time. We have a reward system, and I'm getting off on a tangent. I'm supposed to be talking about Joey Merlino right now, but we have a reward system in this country for tattling on people. Listen, if I make a subconscious fucking decision, right, to go do something stupid, that's on me. I admit my guilt. I admit my part. Fine. I'm not going to point at him and say, well, if he hadn't have told me to do this, that, and the third, then I would have never done this, that, and the third, so it's his fucking fault. I'm a man. I own up to what I did. I never fucking hid the facts. I played the game like everybody else. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And even to push this even further, let me explain some. A lot of these guys in the street, they tell you, oh, yeah, I'd never tell on nobody, blah, 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 blah. They fold up like a fucking stack of old newspapers when they're questioned. I get a call. I go down, go talk to this detective. All right, whatever. I go down there. I sit in front of this lady, this broad. She's asking, she's grinding me, this. I did what I always do. I don't know nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I haven't, whatever. To the point where she realizes either I'm full of shit and lying, which I was, or I'm legitimately telling the truth. That's not up to me to figure out. That's her fucking job. So I leave. I let my co-defendants at the time know what was going on. Next thing you know, she picks them up. Oh, man, she told them everything. He was telling you this, telling us that. He wrote a confession. But rather than ask this fucking lady, well, let me read the confession. Let me see what he says. They buy everything that she says. And they just start opening up, talking. They would have snitched on their own mother at that point. So like I'm saying, at the end of the day, you can't trust the words of a snitch because they will do anything that they possibly fucking can to get themselves out of a jam. And that's what we're seeing with John Rubio. See how I tied that back in right there? Sorry, I went on a tangent there, but that's where we're at with Joey Merlino. So a part of the problem is these tapes are not fully there, and the defense is making the argument of, wait a second here, you're not handing in the tapes, the full tapes. There's huge portions of these conversations that are missing. What the fuck is going on here? The theory is that John Rubio likes Joey Merlino, didn't want him to take that serious of a pinch. That's the theory. And then when you add on top of that misconduct by the FBI, one supervising agent was suspended. The other agent was found to not have done anything wrong. But when an FBI supervisory agent gets suspended, that's a fucking problem. And that's a direct result of the way the evidence was handled. This is what these guys do. This is your job. How can you fuck this up? And so the government realizes they got a problem with John Rubio. Especially when you consider, here's another fact. John Rubio has been in a number of domestic violence problems. So the FBI starts realizing we need somebody else. John Rubio may not be enough. So they get Peter Pug Lovaglio involved. He's another rat. Another guy who's been in trouble with domestic violence. But the federal government, the prosecution, doesn't want the jury to know that. They don't want that evidence or those factual events to be turned into a jury trial. Why not? How many times have you been to court? If you've never been in court, never been in trouble, God bless you. But the thing in court is they always try to make a morality argument. The prosecution always wants to assassinate your character because if they can do that and they can get the jury to believe that you're some fucking scumbag jerk-off, then the jury's likely to believe that you did whatever the government says you fucking did. Or the state, or whoever the case may be. And that's exactly what they want here. They don't want these guys' character or their morality in question. Because the minute that happens, then the juries may not buy the bullshit that they're feeding. And so now there is a legal battle between Joey Merlino's attorneys and obviously the judge and the prosecution because they want that evidence put on for the record. Because believe me, they're going to talk about Joey Merlino's past. Well, you were convicted in 1992 of this, that, and that. You did a 12-year stretch for this, that, and that. So my question becomes, at what fucking point do you say that it's good enough to bring Joey's past, but not good enough to bring these two rats' past? So it's the scale is weighted on one side. It's always that way. I'm not exactly anti-government. I am definitely anti-FBI. That's for certain. I've seen the way that they behave. But the idea that you can shift the scale to one side is absolutely unfair and ridiculous. So where does this leave us? Where it leaves us is unless it's my not my theory, but it's my stance that if the FBI brings another rat forward, which they may do, I think it's a little late in the game at this point, being the 6th of January, 10 days till the trials start. But I've seen the FBI do lots of strange shit before. But they're probably going to rely on John Rubio and the Pug to testify against Merlino. And could that damage Joey? Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I keep going back to one thing. The government doesn't offer a plea deal unless they're not 100% sure they can get a conviction. So I think largely this is going to be based on audio tapes that, 1, aren't complete, 2, the FBI misconduct, 3, the testimony of informants and rats. The government's got an uphill battle, believe it or not, as far as I'm concerned, unless they can flip somebody else. If they flip somebody else that can really corroborate something, then this may be a different story. But I think as we stand right here on the 6th of January, I think Joey's got a great chance of beating it. But what if he doesn't? What if he doesn't? What is going to be the reaction in Philadelphia? How is that going to change the scheme of things? 1, I don't think Joey can run it from prison, because if he gets convicted of this, he's going to go away, and that's going to effectively render him at least gone for 12 or 13 years minimum, right? Joey's what, 52? Do the math there. Come on. He's not going to be able to run it from cell. So underneath of him, you got Steve Mazzone, and you got Joe Legambi. Joe Legambi's in his 70s. He wants nothing to do with this shit. Steve Mazzone has been off the record with people by saying, hey, if somebody else wants to run this shit, let them go ahead. Nobody wants to be sitting at the top, except for Georgie Borghese. That's really what Georgie wants. That's not going to happen either. So what's going to happen in Philadelphia? Well, I think there's going to be a power struggle. I think Mazzone will step out of the way for about anybody. I think that Joe Legambi will stay in a conciliatory sort of position, but I don't think he wants the top. I think Joey would prefer that they did that. But right now, the Philadelphia mob, at least on the street level, is being operated effectively by 3 people. Maybe 4. Because the faction, believe me, the faction is split into 4 subcategories. Joey's at the top, Steve Mazzone, Joe Legambi, Joe Pungatori, and Philip Narducci. And I think, by all accounts, if Joey goes away, Mazzone will step to the left, Legambi will step to the right, and then it's going to be a race from the top. Whether it's Michael Lancelotti, who I doubt would take that over. I think it's really going to come down to Philip Narducci, and it's going to come down to Joe Pungatori. And I think that, if anything, the smart way of going about it is I would split it into 2 factions and have 2 guys at the top or use a front boss system. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I think that if, and I say if because this is my opinion here, if Philip Narducci wants the top, it's going to be very easy for him to do it. The only resistance he's going to face is from guys like Georgie Borghese and maybe Joe Pungatori. But I think that realistically, there's a history with Joe Pungatori and Philip Narducci that may not necessarily be the greatest history in the world. And I'm not going to go into those details. You can kind of look that up for yourself. But it goes back to Philip Narducci's father. So all that being said, everyone is getting along for the sake of getting along, and everybody's playing well in the playground to play well for the most part. Joey goes away, I think you're going to see some really interesting stuff happen in Philadelphia. Joe Legambi, like I said, I don't think really wants necessarily anything to do with the top at this point in his life. Especially considering he was indicted 2.5 years ago and was lucky to walk from that. Steve Mazzone keeps a very, very, very low profile. And I think he's enjoyed just being where he's at, not getting indicted for stuff. But Georgie Borghese wants to be at the top. I think he's made no secret about that. But the only sort of strength that he would have to come from his uncle Joe Legambi, and I don't think he's going to get it. I think there are people that are a lot stronger than him and better leaders than him. So I think realistically, it's going to be between Pungatori and Philip Narducci. Whether or not it happens like that remains to be seen. But I know effectively at this point Joey has taken himself off the streets, and that the streets are effectively being run by 4 different people. So it's all going to come down to how this results. Do I think they're going to go to war? Absolutely not. Originally, I had thought that might be the case. But things have really, really, really simmered down at this point. I think everybody's laying low. And one of the big fears, too, is that this is just the beginning. Word on the streets, at least from the people that I do talk to that are sort of in the know, is that this Merlino trial is just the beginning for Philadelphia. That the FBI is all over them down in Philadelphia, looking into everything. This all goes back to Georgie Borghese opening the fucking social club on Packer Avenue. It wasn't probably a smart move, showing the flag the way that they have. But at the end of the day, this is just a small portion of the sweeping indictments that will probably come down literally in the next 6 months or so. And I think that's a reality, and I think a lot of the guys on the street know. And I think probably what would benefit them most at the end of the day is just to lay low and stay the fuck off the radar. But Philadelphia's never been able to do that. I don't expect that they will be able to do that now. But that's pretty much where we're at. If Joey walks, I think it'll be just business as usual. I think he will take steps to sort of insulate himself a little better. But really, at the end of the day, where this becomes a problem is if Joey goes away. Because then Philadelphia is really going to be on the radar, and it's going to be very hard for that family to operate. So that's pretty much where we're at. As we get closer to the trial date, I'm going to do an entire show with like the evidence here, the evidence there, and we'll really break it down. But I think in terms of what to really watch for is really going to be a conviction. The FBI, I do not think, can win this case without another informant, and it would have to be somebody absolutely substantial like Anthony Nicodemo. But like I said, I don't think that that's going to be the case in this situation. I think the government's just going to be stuck with John Rubio and the pug, and they're going to try their case. Whether or not they're successful is really, they're going to have a hard time explaining government misconduct. They're going to have a hard time explaining the tapes and the evidence. So I think that if I was a guessing guy, Joey's got a hell of a lot more than a 50-50 chance. I think it's more like 70-30 that Joey will walk. But like I said, anything can happen, and the government doesn't always throw out everything they have. But as the trial gets closer, as a dear friend of mine told me the other day, well, the closer it gets, the more leaks that are going to come out. And that's exactly the way this works. So, all that being said, that's pretty much where we stand as far as Philadelphia for the moment. But as we get closer to the trial, obviously you can check us out over at Mob Talk Radio True Crime blog. There's links over on our Facebook page, Mob Talk Radio on Facebook, on Twitter at Real Mob Talk 7. You can get all your updates from Joey Merlino to Sam Giancana to John Gotti Jr. Whatever it is mob related, you can find links everywhere for all of that. I wanted to thank everybody for listening in today, and I know I'm going to get hate mail for talking about a lot of this stuff, but that's all right. I'm kind of used to it by now. But thanks for listening in. Hopefully, at least I got you a little bit up to date on what's going on with the Philadelphia stuff. But as we get closer, I'm going to have a lot more information. But that's pretty much what everybody knows at this point. There may be some more things that I do know that I'm just not talking about right now. But a lot of that is just because I don't like to say stuff unless I can corroborate it. Once I can corroborate it, then it's good to go. I just don't like putting false information out, and I never will. So, all that being said, have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next week here on Mob Talk Radio.